Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today is Zee Razaq, Managing Director of Certax Accounting Limited, based in St Albans. Welcome to you, Zee.
Thank you for having me, Stephen.
Nice to have you back again. And joining Zee is Noah Laguda, founder of Noahsure Real Estate, located right here in Canary Wharf. Welcome to you, Noah.
Pleasure, thank you.
Another one rejoining us again.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Numerous times.
Indeed.
That's good, really good to see you.
Good to be here.
Good. Noah, you're going to go first.
Fantastic.
I'm considering investing for letting purposes in Ghana. I've been told that the opportunities there are exceptional at the moment. Could I ask the panel to outline the funding opportunities for such an investment and whether the regulations for occupation by tenants is as clear and as safe as it is in the UK? I know you're going to concur with this question, aren't you? You're quite keen on promoting Ghana at the
Yeah,
moment.
indeed. Well, I'm sort of keen on promoting Africa as a whole, as you know, very clearly on some of the other shows that I've been on, because I have a lot of clientele out there and a lot of investors from here and overseas as well, that see the potential that Africa does have in relation to property and real estate. And with this sort of Airbnb generation that we now live in. And in relation to your question, Ghana is a great place, where you can see, some very good returns on service accommodation. And literally, in terms of regulation and managing things out there, it's quite easy, much more simpler than you'd actually think, in terms of property management companies that are out there that literally do everything for you. And some really good returns, very, very good returns. I'd say even much better than what's out here in the UK market, hence why people have been getting in touch, wanting to know what is available in Africa. And it's not just about the money, it's also about the tranquility of the place, especially as you mentioned, somewhere like Ghana. There's some amazing hotspots out there. As I've always said, great sort of business attractions as well as, family holidays that can be had out there. So if you own a piece of real estate out there, not only are you making money from it, but it also provides you with a destination hotspot that you can actually
Should be enjoying it too.
You'll be enjoying it too, because let's face it, we all like the sun, don't we?
No, just take you up on the second part of the question, which relates to the tenancies. Are they clear and as safe as in the UK? I guess that is a veiled question about honesty and integrity, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think one would have to accept that generally, if you talk about investment in Africa, you might get some raised eyebrows about the integrity of those involved. Talk to me about that and how that's perhaps changed over the last recent years.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of misconceptions and fairy tales in relation to things of that, and it's my job essentially to kind of remove some of those black clouds, from Africa, by giving people the real facts, the real insight as to what is going on out there. And, I can't, speak any highly of their professionalism. I can't speak any highly of how, easy and transparent it is to do business out there. Of course, in any industry, in any country, you'll always find some sort of something to criticize, and there will be issues. But in terms of, I've always said this, work with a professional, work with someone who knows what they're doing. They'll give you the right information and that will enable you to make the right decisions. But I'm telling you, it is not as, difficult to invest in Africa as maybe what, you might have heard or think.
Okay. And can you control the transaction fairly well from here?
Yes, of course you can. I mean, these days, money transfer is very simple. It's very easy. Currency is exchanged through, many different portals. And again, it is having someone who can direct you to the right channels, through the right channels, and hold your hand through the whole process. And that's something that we've been very fortunate to do for some of our clients, and extremely well as well.
I can only sort of quote what I read in the press, but I'm just thinking about money transactions to places like Ghana. Now I read that Bitcoin is very popular in the African states because the local currencies are not that welcome on the international markets. Is Bitcoin or digital trading encouraged there now?
I mean, digital trading is encouraged there, as it kind of is everywhere, to be fair. I'm not a massive Bitcoin person myself, to be honest. But one thing I would say, mentioning currencies, is that the pound is a lot stronger than the Ghanaian currency or some of the other African currencies. So this is why it represents a great opportunity to really utilize your pound in those
Good value for money.
Good value for money. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Zee, I could see you looking very inquisitively at some of the things there that I mentioned, bitcoins and buying property abroad with digital currencies. I just, with your tax hat on, you're going to start twitching in a minute, aren't you?
Do you know, it's great opportunities, and I think it's thinking about how you structure this, which is probably going to be some of the questions that we're discussing as well. If you don't structure this, you're going to get hit because the volatility of Bitcoin up and down.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Bitcoin fan myself anyway, you know, so.
But it is one way of being able to purchase these transactions. And the challenge people are having on Bitcoin is that the volatility triggers capital gains tax if you own it in your own name, or if you own it in a company corporation tax. So if you don't manage this well, you could end up having a liability and thinking, oh, I made a lot of profit, but you haven't because the currencies fluctuate. It's very different to
I remember doing a program last year with one of the leading law firms, and what they were saying about Bitcoin, or not particularly Bitcoin, but you know, digital currencies, and the difficulty with property transactions is that it's very hard to show and demonstrate the provenance of the money and where it's come from originally. And that was their difficulty as a leading law firm, to be able to, you know, put their hands up and say, yes, we're entirely satisfied that the provenance of this money is correct.
I think you're talking about the anti-money laundering requirements, and that's a challenge throughout the process.
It's a challenge in itself.
It is, and I think we've got to split the challenges of anti-money laundering from the tax implications. Because think about it, if you bought Bitcoin a few years ago, it was really quite high, and suddenly it's dropped down, so your currency, you've actually made a loss on holding the currency. Then there's the transaction of the property going up and down in value, because when you buy investments, depending on what you're doing, if you're doing a development, the uplift, that's taxable. So it could be a theory that you've actually made an uplift, but because you sold it in Bitcoin, that you've actually made a loss, because you've got two major variables. So you've got to manage both of them, or it could be even the worst case scenario, double whammy. The currency's gone up and the property's gone up in value from when you sold it, which sounds like the ideal situation, but from a tax perspective, that's a bit of a pain in the...
Well, it'll keep you in fees, won't it? There we
getting
go.
good advice.
Okay. Zee, your question. What key advice would the experts give to a new and inexperienced person wishing to embark on a career in property development, particularly in respect of company structure?
Fantastic question. The biggest value a property tax advisor, accountant can add is help them structure. So when you start the journey, right, there's three major areas that I always say to people: is how you acquire it, what do you do structure, thinking about the exit, and how do you manage the project. So if you understand those three areas and you get advice, that's huge value. The part of structuring depends on what you're buying, because depending on what you're buying and what you're going to do to it and what your exit is, it changes the solution. Often for property developers, because the nature of property development is they're multiple serial, they don't just do one, they do continuous. We tend to think about group structures. But then there's investment of cost of setting those up and maintaining them. So you have to get that balance right. But if you don't, the implications are quite huge. So I'll give you an example and to try to bring this to life. If I set up, just thinking about one company, I set up as a development co, SPV buys the property to develop, and I don't think about what I'm going to do with the money. When the project's finished, you normally close it down. That will trigger not only the corporation tax that you had on the profit, hopefully, that you made, but also personal tax, how you extract the money. That's not what you really want to do if you're going to go again. So by setting up as a group, having a group holding company and having a subsidiary, huge benefits, provided you meet the rules. You can use something called, I'm going to use some technical word now, substantial share exemption, SSE, so important. Combining that with entrepreneurs relief or business asset disposal relief. They changed the name. I love still calling it entrepreneurs relief because everyone knows what I'm talking about. That's two ways of saving you a lot of money depending on your plan. So having that advice up front, understanding what the value is going to be, what the person needs to extract and what they're going to invest in the future, that's priceless. That advice could save you hundreds of thousands, if not millions, and we have done that for many as well.
And I think it's also very important to say it's very difficult to do these things retrospectively, isn't it?
It is possible, it's harder. because you have our friends called HMRC. So we've got a few examples that this is where people have set them up and now they're like, ooh, we needed some advice. We then have to do it retrospectively. You've got to have clearance from HMRC and go through their process of setting the group company up and explaining to them what the commercial reason is. And just simply saying it's going to save you tax isn't a commercial reason by HMRC.
Probably not what they want to hear.
Yeah, and they've been quite aggressive in this area. There's a particular office, so you have to make sure you know what you're doing, someone's experienced who knows the ins and outs, how to communicate to them. But it can be resolved, unlike property investment, which is a different kettle of fish.
Okay, that's great. Thank you both very much. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break when we'll be asking Noah and Zee more of your questions. Hi and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time with Zee Razaq and Noah Laguda. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you very much.
Okay, on with the show, as they say. So, Noah, your second question. When looking to purchase a holiday home abroad, could the panel advise whether they think it better to appoint a UK agent specialising in the relative area, or would it be best to find a sales agent in the country of choice?
Well,
I don't know what you're going to say.
Do you? It all depends. You know, I mean, if you're using a UK agent that actually specialises in international real estate, then of course they might have an ear out for certain areas that might be suitable for yourself. And because of the relationship that you do have with that agent, you know they're always going to do the best thing for you, and there's that trust, and most importantly, they'll go over and beyond to make sure you fulfill that, that dream of yours. But then again, if you're working with, let's say, a local estate agent that just kind of, deals with their local area, they won't have, squiddly do about what's going on in Spain, or, then you'd have to contact, an agent out there that actually knows the area well, knows the prices, knows, the amenities, knows what's actually happening out there. So if you don't have a UK agent that is international, sort of focused in that sense, then definitely you've got to go, abroad and find one. Yeah, I don't know what you think, Zee.
I totally agree. But I think it's getting the balance right. I think you need both, and depending on what you're doing, because you have some local knowledge and your overseas knowledge. And I know there's a bit of a tax aspect to this as well. Depending on where you're having the holiday furnished lets, they've got special tax rules. So if you're looking at the EEA, that's the European Economic Area, you can claim something called capital allowances that many people don't know against your UK tax. So just even though you own a French property or German property. So depending on where you're doing it, there's benefits, but you do need to have that knowledge on both sides.
Well, I think you're both right on that point of view. I know I spent a number of years working for a Spanish bank doing sort of property in Spain. And of course, the difficulty is that if somebody is just using a UK agent, then that UK agent probably only has 1 or 2 instructions.
Yes.
So unless he or she has got great contacts in the country of sort of your ambition to buy, then you're just not going to get the spread of properties or choice that you really need to make the right decision. You're going to get such a biased focus. And I think, Zee, your point too, it's not just buying the property, it's how that property fits in with your, shall we say, greater estate. And what effect it could have on that estate. Indeed. And any complications that may have. I mean, I know in France, for instance, there's a lot of complications at the moment with sort of inheritance tax, when if you're unlucky enough to have your partner pass away, then of course there can be difficulties about the passing of that property, and it's not just necessarily automatic. And that's the difficulty, and you do need this help.
We often find this when we're dealing with, we've had a lot in Spain. Portugal's a classic right now because of the special rules and privileges Portugal have got, France and these countries, that you need to have advice UK-wise, because there's something called double taxation. And you have to understand that treaty, and you have to know what's happening there to actually get the money. We've had even people outside the EA from Canada and all these different countries. So you do need that knowledge. And what we always say to people, just as you'll probably know, is that you need someone from the UK to explain, because if you're a UK taxpayer, are you a resident here, but also in the country. Same as when you're trying to rent the property out, right? Or get the right service. You need to have someone on the ground there that can give you the implications and then get that balance. Yeah. So it is a bit more complicated, but having a good power team makes a difference.
Well, I think the everlasting moral is there, isn't it? Get your team around you, and make sure you've got the right information very at both ends, because indeed. Like always, buying property is the easy bit.
Yeah.
It's what you do with it while you've got it and how you get out of it.
Indeed,
that's the tough stuff. Indeed. Okay, great, thank you for that. Zee, your second question. Right. Oh, I'm glad to see we have a viewer. Listening to Property Question Time over the years, I've learned that when you're creating a buy-to-let portfolio, it's vital to build a team of experts around you. However, at the start of any project, containment of costs can be equally important. Which of the team experts would the panel think should be selected as a matter of priority in the early days? I wonder what you're going to tell us there, Zee.
Listen, I'm going to be to the point here, right? I always say this, I stand in front of people, many people presenting on this, that your number one relationship is with your accountant tax advisor. It's got to be, because they're your financial health doctor, right? If you don't have that, the implications are huge. And if you're doing property, get someone who understands property, because it is a niche in itself. Yeah. But I think you need 4 relationships. I was thinking about this in deeply to make sure that we can explain it in the right way. Firstly, obviously the accountant tax advisor. Second, you need a good commercial and residential conveyancer to be able to buy that property. So you need a relationship with them. Okay. Thirdly, a commercial finance broker. Very important, because as you go up the game, you need to be able to get financing. So important. I know we'll probably have a bit more detail around that. And fourthly, depending on what you're doing, and this is from dealing with so many property entrepreneurs and being one myself, is a planning consultant. These are relationships, probably in that order, you need to build, because if you don't, you're setting up yourself for failure. And there's many others. I'm sure the audience and the viewers will be saying, oh, there's so many more. There is. But for me, those are so important, because you'll need them regularly through your property journey.
I mean, I take the viewer's point that when you're starting off, you do want to control your costs. And I'm afraid these days, when you do go to lawyers or accountants or anybody else, they tend to say, right, well, let's have a few £1,000s on account and let's start doing this, that and the other. So I understand the ethos behind the question, but I think you're right. Your initial structure of how and where you're going to buy is so important, isn't it?
It's critical now because of good old George Osborne. If you go and buy property in your own name, and there's been conversations, I think recently, Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, interesting what she's going to be talking about. She's saying landlords have not been done fairly recently. People are saying, is that going to reverse what George Osborne did? The reason why I mentioned that is so critical to your decision. Buying properties in your own name, which was the conventional way, isn't necessarily a conventional way if you're going to scale depending on your income. So you have to think about getting professional advice around what structure and scaling it. And we haven't even talked about inheritance tax, which is massive. And that's also in the eye line of the press at the moment, whether there's going to be reforms. So getting that advice isn't really a cost. That's my nuts and bolts of that answer, because if it's going to save you tens of thousands, 100,000 in the future, pay for it now and think about it as a cost spread over those years.
Take the benefits. Yeah.
It's massive.
Zee, you're right to mention that over the last few years we've had quite an interventionist government, haven't we, in terms of the property market, and certainly in recent years they've tended to penalise the smaller investor, the smaller buy-to-let investor, with various tax changes and allowances and the like. Do you see this government being just as interventionist now we have a new Prime Minister, or do you think we'll have a different view on the property market?
I think they've got to change. I know it's a bold statement and everyone will be like, oh, Zee, what are you talking about? The reason why I say that is, look at how many landlords have left the market and we've still got a housing crisis. There's not enough stock and stock available. Landlords were the people that made it available to people. So rents are rising. So you've got to look at the supply side, and the landlords are going to be part of that conversation. Yeah. It's a more of an economic answer, macro, but I think.
Well, you're right.
inevitable.
I mean, rent is rising at a faster rate than inflation, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, it's crazy.
And it's got to, because if you got, depending on your property strategy, if you got HMOs, and I've got a number of clients coming up to me and speaking to me and saying, Zee, what are we supposed to do with this? And then you got, without making this political, Nicola Sturgeon mentioning that she's freezing the rent. That is not the right decision. The decision should be, why are costs rising, right? Not necessarily the rent. The rent is an output of the cost rising of maintaining the business. So remember, we're talking about business here. We're not talking about something else. It has to be viable for people to be able to provide it.
Well, you're right, especially in the HMO situation, where you've got landlords who are offering all-inclusive rents with energy costs including, and maybe got 10 months to go on a short hold tenancy or something.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to move into negative territory, aren't they, if they're not careful?
And they're so critical, because people don't realise, look, why have we got a shortage? Because we're not using the space effectively. That's what HMOs were supposed to do, is so you can have multiple people living there. If you try to rent a house out, you're never going to get the right fit for people. People's families grow, or people's situation changes.
Indeed.
And this becomes such a deep conversation. It's fantastic you brought this up. I think this is where we've got to have a grown-up conversation around this and speak to the relevant powers that you can't continue the way you are, because ultimately you're hurting the larger population. It's not just a cash cow. It's a cash cow that's actually now damaging the economy.
Yes. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for in this show. So big thank you to Zee Razaq. Thank you, Zee, for coming in. To Noah Laguda. You've not had quite so far to come, but thank you for coming in too.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Stephen Galpin. I look forward to seeing you next time on Property Question Time.